Well, hey folks, Mr. D coming back at you again here with some more remote learning. Today we're going to take a quick look at the difference between weather and climate. We're in this kind of weather unit here, and we really want to clear up any confusion between these two words because I feel like they get used interchangeably quite a bit in our everyday lives and on TV, and we want to really understand what we're talking about when we're talking about climate and when we're talking about weather. So let's jump right in. Hopefully you've got the note sheet open in Notability, this blank one here, and you've got that posted to Notability, and you can use this video, you can stop it as you go to fill in your own notes, and those notes will be helpful for you as you work on your CK12 assignment later, and also studying up for future quizzes and tests. So let's talk about weather. What exactly is weather? Weather is a term to describe, so weather describes the conditions. I'm going a little smaller here. The conditions of the atmosphere at a time and place. So that's kind of like the current conditions of the atmosphere. What's going on? And there's a variety of different weather measurements that we can do. We can describe weather by temperature. We can describe it by air pressure, which we've already talked about. We said your average air pressure at sea level is about 15 pounds per square inch, but that fluctuates depending on high and low pressure systems moving through. There are slight changes, but nevertheless, there are differences in air pressure, and that can cause a lot of different weather things. We'll talk about that a couple classes from now. Humidity is a big one. How much water is in the air on a daily basis? That affects our weather. That's a weather reading we can do. Precipitation, which is any form of water falling from the sky, whether that be rain, hail, sleet, snow, all those different things are precipitation. And then wind is another weather reading that we could do, another thing we could keep track of in terms of weather. Now, the big difference here, if we're gonna look real time, weather could be over the course of a week, it could be a month, or normally it's just a snapshot. What is today's weather? What is the weather right now? What was the weather yesterday? If we're going to start talking climate, we're talking long-term average weather in a particular spot. So climate, generally we like to have about 100 years worth of data averaged together to generate some information on climate. We want lots and lots of data anytime we do anything in science, and climate data is no different. We really don't want to just look at current weather and say, whoa, look at what's happening climate-wise. We think we have issues with climate right now because we can compare the past decade or past 20 or 30 years with the past century, the past 100 years worth of data, and see that maybe things are a little different these days. So it's a long-term average weather in a particular spot, and it's basically an average of all of the variables above. So what is the average wind in a specific spot? What's the average humidity, air temperature, pressure, precipitation? All those things can be described for climate in an area. Now, obviously the climate in Arizona is going to be much different than the climate here in Maine. It averages warmer temperatures. Their air pressure is probably generally a little higher there in Arizona, on average. Humidity much lower in Arizona, much drier air, much less precipitation in Arizona on average on an annual basis. And I'm not sure how our winds would compare. It probably depends on the topography of the area. So climate, again, can't stress enough, is a long-term average weather. And we've been doing this daily temperature graph all year long in preparation for today's lesson. Our graph does a really great job of illustrating these differences. Remember I asked you guys early on in the year, I said, where would your dream vacation take place? And I had you choose your second location based upon that. I know some of you chose some really warm, kind of tropical places where a lot of people like to go on vacation. And I'm guessing that your average, your daily weather in that place is probably up, if you chose a tropical place, is probably a pretty flat line up here in, the 70-degree range. Daily temperature is pretty constant. That's a pretty good indication of a consistently warm climate. Now there's variation within that, and if you watch the YouTube video with Neil deGrasse Tyson, the short one I posted for today, he does an awesome job using the analogy of a dog walking on a leash. Back and forth that dog goes, but the guy walking is going to follow a fairly consistent path. We see that with weather versus climate as well. It's a great analogy. If we look at our weather over the past school year here in Saco, if we average all these data points together, we could draw in there what's called a line of best fit, and that line of best fit probably looks about like that. And what we see is this classic drop in temperature on average, this climate, this seasonal change we have here in Saco called autumn, out there in September, October. The height of our winter, our coldest time of the year was somewhere right in here, late December, January. And what we saw when we first left class there was we were absolutely on a warming trend, right? So there's fall, there's winter, and finally we are entering spring as our temperatures warm. So it's been pretty cool to watch. It goes right along with that Neil deGrasse video you guys are going to watch, where if you can imagine that blue line there, that might be the track that your dog walks on a leash, bouncing back and forth. Daily weather is highly variable, but if we average all that together, we get a pretty good picture of climate, and it's pretty neat. Now, you guys know that I chose Puerto Madryn, Argentina, because they're in the southern hemisphere. They're the same distance from the equator as Maine, but south of the equator. And our guess was they probably have a similar climate to Maine, just kind of flip-flopped. And it's proving to be pretty true. If we look here, we started the year as temperatures were warming in Puerto Madryn. It's maybe been a little more gradual, maybe a little less drastic seasons in Puerto Madryn. But what we're seeing as we left was it is cooling off. They're entering late summer, early fall in Puerto Madryn right now, and they're officially in fall now, and the temperatures are cooling in the southern hemisphere while it's warming up here. So just really neat stuff to think about. That graph we've been building all year comes in handy for today's lesson. We start to think about the dog on the leash and averaging that together and coming up with our climate here in Maine compared to weather, which is what we've been measuring every day. Temperature is a weather variable, but if we average that together, we get a brief picture of Maine's climate. It's seasonal kind of climate. So pretty cool stuff. Pretty brief lesson today. You're gonna want to watch that Neil deGrasse video. It's worth it. It's pretty good. And then go ahead and complete your CK12 assignment for today.